Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief of National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to our first regular installment of My Next Question, National Jeweler's new webinar series sponsored by RDI Diamonds. Today's session is hosted by our Senior Editor Fashion, Ashley Davis, and features Gurki Basra, a brand consultant, founder of TeamGurki.com, and the former senior jewelry and watches buyer for Barneys. Before I turn it over to Ashley to get the webinar started, I just wanted to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. I'll be back on at the end of the discussion to share the questions with Ashley and Gurki. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website within 1 to 2 business days following today's live event. Now I'll turn it over to Ashley and Gurki, and as I mentioned, I'll be back on to field any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm Ashley Davis, and I'm so excited to have Gurki on with us today. Gurki, your most recent jewelry-specific role was with Barneys in the year before, up until the year before they shuttered, but your retail experience far precedes your time with Barneys. So I'd love to start just by talking a bit about your background and your experiences, where you've worked and where you've studied.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for everybody that signed up. I think this is great in this day and age to get information direct from experts and from publications like National Jeweler. I think is super invaluable. So the fact that you guys offered this for free is amazing. And I think kudos to everybody that signed up. So I've been in the industry for over 15 years in a lot of different functions and companies. I worked at Victoria's Secret in finance as well in merchandising. I worked at Old Navy. I actually did a couple of stints at Neiman Marcus. One was my first job out of college, and then I came back after Old Navy. I also have an MBA. After Barneys, I was at Brunello Cucinelli, and then decided to do something completely different, moved to the West Coast and got into B2B software management, still for a company that's fashion and retail facing. And they're actually digitalizing the market buying process, which could not be more relevant now. But yes, but I'm most well known for having been at Barneys for a little over 3 years, and loved my time there, loved jewelry. And then from a personal perspective, I also was featured on a dating show called Dating Around on Netflix, and people seem to really gravitate towards my story. And so from a personal perspective, I also feel very strongly about female empowerment, and I try to bring some of that content to my personal life and professional life as well.
I've loved watching from afar on Instagram your kind of post New York City, post Barneys chapter and just starting your own consulting company. And I have loved reading your articles on your website, teamgurki.com. And one of the articles recently, because you cover all kinds of topics, but one that really piqued my interest was an article where you went specifically into buying and buying methods and kind of breaking down some of the analytical processes that I think are super helpful to retailers, and kind of talking about going with analytics versus just going with your gut as a retailer and buying. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. And again, I've done a lot of different functions, but I have an MBA. I'm very quantitatively focused. I love data, but at the end of the day, product is always king, and you always have to use your merchant gut to make the right decisions, and I'll always be a merchant. But there are some really easy tools and that you can use to make sure that you're making the right decisions. And I think a lot of retailers fall in kind of either they're all gut and they go with their gut, or they're all data. And I think you kind of have to balance the two. And one of the matrices or models that I've always used in my career and that we used very strictly at Old Navy is the BCG growth share matrix. And I go into it on my website, and this matrix has been in existence since the 1970s. So if you just Google BCG growth matrix, you'll get a ton of information. But at the very basic level, it essentially allows you to dissect your business by bucketing it in a few different ways. So, and again, this is very intuitive for a lot of merchants, but having this tool to kind of help validate your gut is really helpful. So basically when you have a new product or a new collection, it starts off as what they call a question mark. So you don't have any history on it. You might be able to tell if it's going to do well or not based on what the collection is and how similar it is to other collections. But essentially it starts off as a question mark. With a question mark within this model, they say you shouldn't overly invest, right? Like if you don't know how it's going to do, you're not buying the whole collection and expanding it out to all stores. Maybe you're just buying a little bit of it. Maybe you do a test, maybe you do a trunk show. Once that's successful and it's proven itself, it becomes a star. So once you have a star, this is where you're like, okay, this collection was great. Let me buy more of this collection. Let me expand it to stores. If you're doing, you know, clothing, maybe you add sizes, maybe you add different colorways. Maybe you had something in a diamond, now you want to add an emerald. So you're starting to kind of expand it. Once a star has proven to have a few successful seasons, it becomes a cash cow, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that term. So a cash cow is basically a product or a brand that's bringing you steady income month over month and that you know is going to bring in business. Now, once the cash cow starts declining, it becomes a dog. And the problem that a lot of retailers fall into is a collection will be great, they'll expand it and it becomes a cash cow, but they don't reinvigorate that collection. They don't talk to the designer to say, hey, this has been amazing for a few seasons, how do we bring it back to life? And it just becomes a declining dog. And if you've overly invested in cash cows, you can find yourself sitting there like, oh my God, I don't have any stars to kind of fill on the back end of the cash cows. Now, again, I'm using a lot of lingo. This is, you know, it might sound a little confusing to use all these words, but intuitively what you can do is you can look at your business and essentially dissect it by saying, okay, here's all my brands. These are my cash cows. These are my question marks. Oh my God, I don't have any stars to replace these cash cows when they decline. And we actually use this at Old Navy where we literally went through, I was the merchant for dresses and outerwear. And we literally went through every single style and assigned it that value. Is it a star? Is it a question mark? Or is it a cash cow? And if there was gaps in the collection, then we would go back and produce more styles that we needed to sort of fill that in. And again, you know, this matrix sounds simple, but it's actually very complex and you can get into it in a lot of different levels. So like at Old Navy, for example, we even used it like with our production facility. So what fabrics have we had in the pipeline for so long that perhaps we're going to decline, and how do we reinvigorate that? And again, there's lots of different ways to use this model, but it's just, you know, like you said, balancing merchant gut with analytics and data is always really necessary. And of course, if you're an amazing merchant and you're like, you know what, this is what I use this matrix. This is what it's telling me. I need more question marks, but I don't care. I believe in my cash cows and I know they're going to keep doing what I need them to do. And that's what I'm going to go with. That's okay too. It's just, again, it's, you know, a lot of retailers don't do both and they just kind of depend on one or the other.
I think one of the things that made me feel really hopeful reading your article and this kind of breakdown was you talking about, well, you have to have enough question mark collections and designers that, you know, that they could grow into your next star. And I loved that kind of room that there is for creativity and for the retailers who are at heart design lovers, who appreciate artistry and want to share artistry, that there's that room for them to explore and not just depend on their few like top cash cows, let's say.
Yeah, 100%. And now, especially with social media and, you know, trends getting knocked off right and left and the overexposure that we're all seeing, I think consumers also want that novelty. And, you know, so novelty I know is like an overused term as well in the industry, but people want to see cool new things. People want to know who are these up and coming designers that, you know, worked their asses off from the ground up and, you know, made it happen. And I think all that is really, really important. And you're right, you know, if you're a Bergdorf's or a Barneys, there might be less opportunity for those designers, but at least at Barneys, we tried to obviously give a platform to up and coming. But you know, again, this matrix, it's there to help inform the retailers. Okay, if this is a question mark, then maybe I can invest in a little way, and let's see where it goes. Like, it doesn't have to be a all in or nothing kind of situation. But yeah, you're right. I feel like, you know, small brands is kind of where the future is going. At least that's what I feel. And I think, yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that too. I totally agree with you.
Why is that? I'm curious that you say that you feel like small brands are the future in some sense.
I just I'm thinking like 5, 10, 15 years out, and looking at younger consumers and the causes that they care about. And there's so much more transparency now. And again, I'm like aging myself saying this, but like our generation, I'm 38 going on 39. When I was shopping, like I didn't know all the stuff that was going on with, you know, the production wastage in China, and, you know, kind of all of these social issues that are really important. And I do believe that consumers now are going to be more educated. They're smarter. They care about the world. And I think it's great. I think we didn't have visibility to that, or we would have cared as well. And the fact that there's more transparency now, I think people will care more. And I think people will also want to support small, local, grassroots. I think, you know, with the pandemic, it's kind, you know, all these issues are popping up. Yeah, so anyway, so
Okay.
I think there's going to be sort of a resurgence of more grassroots, for sure.
That's a great point. And then kind of taking a wide view, since you have worked with such a varied group of retailers, I just feel that you have such a great overall probably understanding of what are some of the biggest mistakes that retailers make that you've noticed over your years working with like all different kinds of companies.
Yeah, so there's definitely some common themes, and I touched on it a little bit when we talked about the BCG growth matrix, but over investing in cash cows is definitely, I would say, the number one reason that a retailer goes under is they put in way too much emphasis on proven large brands. And when that big, large brand starts declining, or, you know, that one dress that sold every year starts declining, they kind of get in trouble. They don't have something to replace that business with. Another thing is there's also a lack of sort of purpose or mission in a lot of retailers. You know, at Barneys specifically, there wasn't a clear mission statement as to what we did as merchants. And so I go back to my time at Old Navy, because at the time the business was doing really well and there were a lot of great best practices that I've adopted. But at Old Navy, our mission for the women's business was to provide great product for women as their bodies are transitioning through life. So as they're having a baby, as they're gaining or losing weight. And so when we created a dress, for example, did it have, you know, a good curve line for your waist if, you know, you might be gaining weight or losing weight? And so like we always had a purpose and how we wanted to, and that purpose kind of helped you in all kinds of ways, but it really helped to make sure that everyone was on the same page. And one thing that, you know, at Barneys we didn't have was a purpose, which was a big kind of, it caused a lot of confusion. And anyway, it wasn't very clear there what the purpose was. And then another kind of going back to the BCG growth matrix, another big kind of downfall is over investing in trends, right? So we didn't do this at Barneys, but I saw a lot of retailers do it. When the choker trend came in, right? It was all about off the shoulder and the choker. I think this was like 3.5 years ago now. My God, time is flying. But it was all about the choker trend. And so what we did is we selected a few designers that we knew were already doing that trend amazingly, and we added them to our portfolio, versus what I saw other retailers do is now all of a sudden they're asking all of their jewelry brands, make me chokers, this is what I need, which of course you'll have some of that if that's the trend, and you know, you have an amazing chain link from Irene Newirth and you want her to do it in a shorter length, cool, great. But over investing in trends and basically those question marks. And then once that trend dies out, they now have all this product that they're wanting to send to the vendors. And then in terms of, you know, finance 101, I guess, a lot of these malls or big, development companies would give retailers like almost free rent if you opened up a store there, right? So Barneys, we got in, a lot of trouble doing that because we opened up all these stores in these malls because the rent was almost free, but they didn't actually have the cash flow to fill those stores with great inventory. And so not actually doing the math on, does this decision make sense, from a P&L perspective, full top to bottom. Just because the rent is free doesn't mean you can afford the people that are going to work there, the product you're going to need for that specific market, which is continuously getting more and more localized, right? So whatever they're selling in that store in that city might be different than what we sold in New York, which is also more expensive because you can't transfer it. Anyway, sorry, I'm going into like my finance stuff, but I would say those are the biggest ones, but from like a portfolio management perspective, not managing your cash cows and your trends in a healthy way is probably like the number one downfall I saw.
That's so interesting, just because I can imagine the temptation to see your best selling collections and to just invest in them so heavily and to just make it a cornerstone of your business. I mean, it almost seems logical. So I guess what is kind of the
balance
line that you draw to make sure that you don't overinvest to the point where next season all of a sudden it's not doing as well and then it's just on a decline that you can't control?
Right. And again, like that goes back to like your merchant gut, right? Like if and I think that comes with a lot of experience, to be honest. So I know I don't have like a straight up answer for that, but that comes with a lot of experience. Like something like a choker, I feel like we saw that wasn't going to be a long-standing trend. Like once you've been in the fashion industry long enough, like you understand how long trends live. And especially now this day and age with social media, trends don't actually live as long. And so that's a little bit of a balance. I think if you're seeing a trend sell, I think the part that is great and that what you alluded to is if a brand is doing that trend really well, like let that brand do it. Don't ask other brands to also do that trend. And now you're in your store and all of your collections look the same. Let the designer's point of view come through and sure, invest in it. Make sure that you're keeping the inventory in, but I think the trouble comes when you force your other vendors or your other brands to mimic a trend or to do something that you know is selling in another brand, that perhaps that brand can't fill the inventory or whatever it is. And then all of your collections start to kind of cannibalize one another. So I think you just have to be really careful. And, to your point, something might be really blowing out and amazing. And if you're like, you know what, I'm just going to take a gamble on this, and you have the cash flow and you can manage it and you're not stressing out your brand because it's on consignment or something, by all means, like max that out. But I think there's just a lot of different factors that you kind of have to weigh in.
Okay. I do want to touch a little bit on consignment. I know it's kind of a hot topic, especially I would say from a brand perspective. But I think it just remains relevant because it can be such a difficult business practice, especially for small brands. And I'm curious if you think that there are some ways, whether on the brand or retailer side, but to kind of best navigate consignment, how it can work, and if there are any kind of practices that should be avoided when it comes to consignment.
Yeah, consignment's a tough one. When I was at Barneys, we actually converted everyone to consignment, which was really tough for the brands. And I did my best to kind of manage and help that we didn't like stretch them out too thin by asking for too much inventory, but it's really, really tough. One thing that we did do is provide prepayments, which helped with production and upfront costs for designers. So, we would say, okay, every quarter we're going to give you $25,000. And as we sell, the $25,000 pot will kind of, go down. And then once you exceed 25,000, we'll write a check for the balance. And so that was one kind of creative way that we helped brands and designers, but it is really, really tough. And some brands I remember, so Marla Aaron, I love her. And I like pursued her so hard. I wanted her at Barneys. I like loved her collection, but you know, she was like, I can't do this for my business. Like, it's just not going to happen. And she did it on her own, and she got creative, and, you know, and she's doing amazingly. And it's been so wonderful to like see her journey. And, you know, I think a lot of brands, and unfortunately Barneys was very guilty of doing this. A lot of brands and designers were just dying so bad to be at Barneys that they would do anything, even if it was 100% consignment. You can have whatever inventory you want. And then on the back end, they would really get in trouble. And the brands that I think could do consignment well were the ones that kind of put their foot down and said, okay, I can do consignment, but I can only do it for this value in the Madison store. I can't go to Seattle, or, you know, your Chicago store, whatever it was. And so, and we try to work with that. And then we also provided a lot of trunk show opportunities and try to line up trunk shows for, you know, really obviously Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, all those important holidays to kind of help those vendors. But yeah, consignment is tough. There's like no way to get around it. It's a tough business to manage, and it's a tough business to like request more product from your brands when they're on consignment.
Right.
But yeah, it's a fine balance.
I think that's very helpful though. And also just knowing that you can say no. And, you know, it doesn't mean, you know, because I imagine the temptation of having Barneys on your resume would have been very, very great, but that you can succeed without it. And clearly, as time goes on, we see that, you know, the institutions we depended on aren't infallible.
Right.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Barneys, and just because you kind of have the interesting timing of having departed before Barneys went under, but not so long before. So I'm just curious to hear your take more on your experience there.
Sure. I mean, the writing was kind of on the wall there. I loved my time at Barneys. I loved working with the amazing designers that I worked with. Had the company been, you know, in better financial standing, I would have stayed longer, but it, you know, the writing was kind of on the wall. And Barneys is interesting, and there's been so many papers written about why they failed. And so like from a financial perspective, like I'm not even going to go into that, but in terms of the culture there and what the merchant leadership did to Barneys, you know, Barneys used to stand for exclusive, unique, amazing product that you couldn't find anywhere else in the world. And, you know, this was probably before my time, but at some point I went to Barneys because of that. I wanted to learn product. I wanted to be the best in the world at, you know, being a buyer. And so I was like, of course I have to go to Barneys to do that. But at some point, you know, there was too much emphasis on looking at what everybody else is doing. What is Moda doing? What is Saks doing? What is Bergdorf doing? And kind of, again, going back to like, our purpose was kind of lost. And, you know, I have to throw out the disclaimer that the jewelry business there was actually really productive. And we were actually doing really well despite the rest of the store not doing so well. So, it's, you know, it's kind of a catch-22 in terms of that. But, you know, there was just like a lost point of view. If you went into the store, you no longer knew what Barneys stood for. So if you went to the women's department, you know, there was a little bit of everything, but there's not one single thing that, you know, the merchant team kind of stood for. And that was very obvious. You could go to Barneys, you could go to Bergdorf's, and I don't know if you could really tell the difference in the product mix. And again, that just goes back to like merchandising. And then from like a company culture perspective internally, you know, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on continued training. You know, we would hire interns and then promote them to assistant buyer and then to buyer very quickly, just because the turnover was so fast. And so you had a lot of these kind of underqualified and wonderful girls, wonderful men in these roles, but they, you know, they didn't necessarily have the business training to be able to run a, you know, $50 million book of business. And, you know, and there was a kind of also an overemphasis on, oh, we got to do a lot of social media. We got to know what the trends are, but okay, what about etiquette training? How do you teach your buyer how to email a vendor properly? Or let's do retail math 101 refresher for everyone. There was sort of none of that. So internally, the company just became very reactive versus proactive. And whenever you're managing a book of business, and I always felt really sensitive and protective over my brands. Like I always told them, yes, Barneys writes my check, but I work for you. And I always wanted to kind of be their advocate and make sure that I was running their businesses profitably. And, I had the benefit of, I have an MBA, I'd been in the industry for a while, had a different point of view, but a lot of buyers didn't necessarily have that, or assistant buyers. And I wish there had been a little bit more of that. And then, financially, obviously the company was in trouble, because of the debt that they got themselves into, overextending stores, et cetera. And again, all of that can be Googled, but internally that just, created a lot of decisions that weren't necessarily great. So, we'd have our marketing meetings and it was all about how much co-op did you collect? Now you have to increase it from last year. And, that should not be the purpose of a marketing meeting. The purpose of a marketing meeting, yes, of course, you have to collect advertising dollars, et cetera, but it should be, are we telling our customer what, are we conveying what our purpose is to the customer? Are we giving him and her the best product, et cetera? But that, that wasn't there. And again, I'm kind of speaking a little bit more highly than getting into the nitty gritty of the day in, day out, but that's kind of my perspective. And I'm sure if you spoke to other folks from Barneys, they would probably agree. But yeah, those are kind of, and it's sad because Barneys was such an institution, like you said, and so many people were devastated when it closed down. I think everyone really thought that it was going to make it through, or, but I think it's a different world and it used up all of its 9 lives, unfortunately.
In a sense, for smaller retailers, just by listening to you, I feel like they have the benefit of being more nimble. And, if you're smaller, maybe you can adapt more rather than being so deep into a certain practices or certain situations where it's hard to recover. One challenge that I think that any type of retailer faces today just is the fact that brands now kind of do operate as their own retailers to an extent. Just the fact that most of them have e-commerce, most of them, and have needed e-commerce to survive, just to be viable. And I'm curious, how do retailers go about, I guess, competing with the own brands that they stock and carry? Because with social media, we all are, in a sense, like on equal footing.
Totally. Yeah, no, totally. And that's a great thing too, right? Like now there's so much transparency in the marketplace. But yeah, 100%, I feel like that's one of the biggest kind of problems right now facing retailers. And one of the things that Barneys lost at is we didn't have a distinct point of view. Like people still, COVID aside, people still want to go into a store or online and want to know, okay, what does Lisa Aiken tell me? Like, what does she think I should buy? And so it's still about curating that experience and having, the buyer or whoever your head merchant is, unfortunately, it is a world of social media now. People care about who are these people behind the scenes that are making these decisions. Do I relate to this person? And again, like, who's your customer and what's the purpose of your company will kind of help guide that. And I think it's just about making sure that if you're a small retailer, you have your best tastemaker making the decisions and you're communicating that to your clients, right? Like you know your clients intimately and they understand what you bring to the table that might be different. That's one of the beautiful things about product. Like we can talk about business all day long in fashion, but at the end of the day, but in fashion, it's an art at the end of the day. Like, yes, we can talk about all the business problems that the industry has brought on and how we can fix all of that. But at the end of the day, I'm going to care if an authority or someone that has great taste that's putting together an outfit. I would have Lori Hirschleifer, for example, perfect example, amazing. She's got her own point of view. It's not for everyone. I could never dress like her. I could not pull that off. But there's something about her that makes you say, you know what, I'm going to go into her store and I want to buy from her. It's not because she has unique exclusive product, which she does, some is exclusive to her, but it's because of who she is. And a lot of retailers sometimes kind of lose that, like, who are you, what's your purpose, and make sure that you're kind of sticking to it versus, you know, looking at, oh, okay, what's that retailer down the street doing? Oh, great, now I got to do that too. And so I think that's what's going to kind of help people survive, is getting back to like merchant 101 stuff.
So right, so as much as there is the temptation to look, and it's easier than ever to look on people's websites and on their social channels at what everyone's doing, and you know, people just seem to have it all together, but ultimately it would be better to spend time just honing your own vision, creating your own specific voice that people come to you for.
100%. And I think another thing that is kind of we're guilty of in the fashion and retail industry is we try to only learn from like fashion and retail, right? So we go to businessoffashion.com, WWE, etc. Those are all great resources, but Boston Consulting Group, for example, they're huge in the consumer goods world and retail. Go to the website, Google purpose-driven missions, and see how other companies that maybe aren't in fashion, but they're in consumer goods, so all the learnings apply, what are they doing? And it might kind of help you turn, you know, kind of help you think of things differently. Because sometimes I feel like we're so myopic in this industry, and it's good just to kind of look outside and get like just a different perspective.
I totally agree with that. Just even, you know, what someone like Nike is doing. I mean, most of the time the same kind of initiatives won't work for luxury products or for fine jewelry specifically, just because of the value, but there's so many little nuggets there of where retail's headed too, I think.
Yeah, 100% for sure. That's a great example.
I also just wanted to ask you for a brand that in this super saturated marketplace, for a brand that wants to form a relationship with a buyer, a relationship with a store, and they don't have one yet, what is the best way to go about getting in touch? And are there any definite don'ts for trying to build new relationships?
I don't believe there's any don'ts. I mean, obviously don't be rude and like be and professional and all of those things. But like when I was at Barneys or even at Neiman's, like we had brands reach out to us all kinds of ways. Now you can find people everywhere, whether it's, you know, find who they are on LinkedIn, message them on Instagram, here's my portfolio, and get creative. Like don't just Google and try to find an email address and email them. There's lots of different ways to get in touch with buyers and sometimes even CEOs. I had my CEO be like, hey, this person emailed me directly. Can you like come out and see? And just keep trying. You know, people are busy, but they're also grateful if brands are reaching out to them because it also saves them work, right? Like, okay, cool. Let me go check this brand out. They're pretty nice and I would have never found them, you know, beforehand. So I don't necessarily think, I at least from a communication perspective, I don't believe there's any do's and don'ts when it comes to that. And everyone is scrappy now. Everyone's looking on Instagram. Like you got to use what you got. And yeah, so I would say just keep trying. And just because something isn't right one season, it doesn't mean it can't be right another season. And, you know, just be smart, make your notes, make sure you know what retailer said no and why they said no. So that when you reach out to them again, you can be really intelligent and say, hey, I know we had this conversation at the time, you weren't looking to add 14K resources, but just want to check in if anything's changed. And FYI, I've also created this in 18K or whatever it is. Like, I think just be really smart and take detailed notes about your communication. Because one thing that as a buyer, I mean, I don't know if I would say it's a don't, but it could be a little bit of a pet peeve is when maybe you reach out to a brand that you loved, but you didn't have the budget to bring them in or something. And they like, don't even remember what you had talked about. And now you're having to spend time refreshing the conversation, which should be fine. But honestly, in this industry, everyone is stretched so thin. There's like no resources. People now buy 100 brands, whereas 10 years ago, you were managing maybe 15 brands. And so it's a different time. So just make sure you're taking your notes and, kind of writing down the sort of communication you've had with every retailer. Just makes you seem like you're more on top of it and more professional. And it just helps to like kind of move the conversation along quicker.
Okay, awesome. Um, well, I think that we've covered kind of a wide range here, but I would love to open it up for questions,
Okay.
and just to see kind of what areas people are interested in the most. So thank you so much for all of this,
Thanks,
Gurki.
Ashley. Yeah,
Is
of
there
course.
anything you want to add off
No,
the
just
top of your head?
thank you for having me on. And again, whoever is like listening to this, like kudos to you, because a lot of people don't take the time to use the resources at hand. And there's so many free things you can do out there to get smarter. And so, so I think this webinar is great, and hopefully, yeah, hopefully people will keep tuning in, because I think this is awesome.
Yeah. Quickly, actually, before we go to questions, though, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now so that
Sure.
people know where to find you.
Yes, so I launched my website. It's teamgurki.com. The name is a nod to this hashtag that started trending when I went on this TV show for Netflix that we touched on, Dating Around. I'm divorced, I'm Indian. The premise of the show is that you go on 5 dates. One of the guys I went on a date with was not very nice to me about my culture or my divorce, and that clip went viral and that hashtag started trending. But I provide business and consulting services based on my retail background, and then from a personal perspective, like I mentioned, empowering women to break social norms that they feel like they have to live in is really important to me. I think people should live for them. And so along with some of the business advice and services that I provide online, I'm also just putting content in terms of like my personal life and just to empower women.
Very cool. Yes. And your Instagram you have one now for @Team Gurki.
I do. It's Team Gurki, but then it's also gurkibasra.com. My personal one obviously is personal, so I still speak to some business stuff, but you can follow me on either one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And Michelle, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Gurki. That was a great discussion. We had a lot of questions come in beforehand, and we had a few come in during the discussion. As a reminder, you can still type questions in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. While we're kind of filtering through those questions, I just wanted to say a quick word about our sponsor, RDI Diamonds. RDI Diamonds, the selection you want, the quality you need. Thousands of diamonds, that's just the beginning. RDI offers a wide range of services and support to help you succeed, from flexible memo options, a partnership with De Beers Group Industry Services, to generous stock options and cost-efficient shipping. RDI's goal is to provide the highest quality of both care and diamonds to your store. Visit rdidiamonds.com today to learn more. And again, that is rdidiamonds.com. Now let's get started with our listener question. The first one I want to go to here came in during the webinar, and I thought it was really interesting. And Gurki, this goes to you. A listener wants to know, Barneys was the epitome of forward in the fine jewelry sector. Is there such a thing as buying a trend too early for your audience?
I mean, to that point, no. And someone like Barneys, that's what they wanted to do in terms of, if there was a mission statement, that probably would have been what it was, right? So to provide a distinct point of view and a trend before the trend even becomes a trend, but that's a really hard one to keep financially soluble if your customer is not ready for it. So I think it all depends on who your customer is. And if you know your customer is going to go for it, then great, then you can provide them the trend in advance. But if they're not, which I think, a lot of the, I think there was kind of a loss on who our customer was. So I think it just goes back to understanding who your client and your customer is and what they want. And then if you're able to answer that question with them in mind and the answer is yes, then go for it, then provide them that trend because it'll sell. But yeah, I think that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. We have another great question here from a retailer in Texas. She wants to know, Gurki, you touched on the fact that designers are selling direct online. We all know this. Can you tell us what you did at Barneys so you did not lose sales to them directly? Did you request certain things from your consignment designers?
Yeah, I mean, that was always a tough conversation with the brands, right? We, as a retailer, you always want exclusive product because you don't want to compete with their online channel. And so for me, it became about just having the open and honest conversation with the brand and having the transparency from them to say, here's 20 pieces, 15 of these are also at Moda and online, and we just had to have those open conversations. But I'm not gonna lie, that was a tough one. It was really hard for us to get exclusivity in this new, especially with the cash flow issues that Barneys was having. But we had a lot of brands that wanted to partner with us, and they would perhaps give us exclusivity for like 2 weeks. They would say, okay, here's the new collection, you can have it for 2 weeks. And then we would kind of build like an event around it, make sure we were clienteling to it. And that was sort of like our solve for that. But that's a tough one. That's a tough one to solve for sure.
And you mentioned earlier, and this is a question for me that came up for me during the panel, that, parties, part of Barney's problem was it kind of lost its point of view and it lost its kind of claim to being exclusive and you can only find this at Barney's. I was curious too, though, what role e-commerce played in Barney's kind of demise, both from the standpoint of losing business to e-commerce competitors and also perhaps them not having a strong enough e-commerce presence themselves. Like, did you feel the retailer scaled up enough and did enough with its online presence to compete?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, our e-commerce sucked. And like when I was there, there was also, now most of the brands are willing to have their pieces online, but there was still that mentality that, oh no, if I put my stuff online, it's gonna get knocked off. And so we actually had a lot of jewelry brands that didn't want to be online. And so we had to build that from the ground up, work on operations because of, insurance issues and shipping could only be certain days and all of that fun operational stuff with jewelry. But 100% in terms of Barney's specifically, the e-commerce website was not strong. There wasn't an expert within the company that knew how to grow that business. It was just a lot of band-aids and gum that, to be honest, that like kept the website together. And then you had newcomers, which like Moda, which is now a really strong voice in jewelry. When I started, they were just dabbling in it. And I remember sitting there with our CEO and our chief merchant being like, they're going to eat our lunch. Like, look at what they're able to do. And they had just started. And Moda's model obviously is all online and they're as flexible as humanly possible on shooting your product. I worked with them briefly when I was at Brunello Cucinelli, and they're like, we can come in the showroom whenever, 8 a.m. or 2 in the morning. We don't care. We'll come, we'll make it easy. We'll take pictures and it'll be up. Like their whole thing is make it quick, make it fast. And so you had people like that just totally, and they can take like beautiful photography. And so, yeah, you're 100% correct. That was a huge downfall for Barneys, is not being able to keep up online digitally. Yep.
Okay, we have tons of questions coming here. They're all so good. We're not going to get to them, all of them, but I think this one is interesting. My partner and I own a custom fine jewelry atelier where we make one-of-a-kind custom fine jewelry for private clients. What is your best piece of advice for scaling yet keeping the integrity of our one-on-one business?
That's first of all, it's an awesome business. I actually think there's, again, like, and I touched on it a little bit, there's more of an appetite for that now. I think people want more custom work. And I think the fact that you can make something just for you, nobody else is going to have it, no one else is going to knock it off, I think is amazing. So I don't know how big this company is or what they're doing to advertise or anything like that, but I think, again, just hone in on what you do that's great and like shout it from the rooftops, like start promoting all that stuff and how you're different. Obviously Instagram is like, I'm sure everyone's sick of talking about Instagram at this point, but the like point of entry to like get stuff communicated out is really low, obviously, with social media, and you can get the word out. And so I think in that case, it's really just about getting the word out. And again, I don't know how many clients this retailer may have, but one of the most successful events that we would have at Barneys is when we had a dedicated, very loyal client and they wanted to do a luncheon at their house with their girlfriends, right? And so, and again, this is probably like high net worth individuals if they're doing bespoke work. And so how do you tap into your clients for, for something like that to kind of grow your customer base. I think those would be like sort of my two advice. Don't be shy about, you know, communicating what great product and services you're providing, and then use your clients, not use your clients, but, you know, tap into your clients network and see, because a lot of people are starving for those experiences, especially right now. And even if it has to be digital, I think you'd be surprised at how many clients and customers would be willing to kind of help get the word out on your business.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to look to, we had a couple questions come in about forecasting for the holiday season. So we had one listener who wanted to know, what do you see happening with gold jewelry this holiday season? We all know the price of gold is obviously up very high, but, you know, yellow gold particularly is on trend for fashion jewelry. So what do you see happening there?
The holidays. I think this, not for jewelry, but I think this holiday is going to be rough for a lot of people in the fashion industry. Jewelry specifically, I mean, whenever there's uncertainty, obviously gold prices go up, and jewelry is the one category from what I'm hearing that's selling sort of everywhere. And it's kind of a guilt-free purchase right now. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't feel good buying anything right now with everything that's going on. But I don't feel bad about buying maybe a beautiful piece of jewelry that I know is going to last forever. Gold obviously has strong value. I think it will actually be a decent holiday season for jewelry. However, and I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth, because there is so much uncertainty right now in the economic climate of the world and this pandemic, you know, I think you just have to be really careful how much you're investing. But at least everyone that I've spoken to that's at big retailers or small, they're telling me that jewelry is selling, and that clients and customers actually feel good buying jewelry versus other categories. And people that have money are gonna wanna shop. They're just gonna wanna do it in a way that's probably a little bit more conservative, and jewelry falls in that category. So I actually am hopeful that it's gonna be a decent season for jewelry this holiday.
And then someone else wanted to know specifically about diamond jewelry. Where do you see the next trends emerging going for the diamond jewelry post-COVID? One of the things they wanted to know, and I think this is a very good question, lab-grown diamonds versus natural, and what is going to influence the sale and consumers, what consumers end up picking?
I know lab-grown diamonds is such like an interesting, it's one of those things where as a jewelry person, I don't know how to feel about it, but I understand the value. And I think there's a space for both, to be honest. I think if somebody wants an antique, old mine cut, you know, that, you know, shows beautiful personality, I think there's a customer for that. I think if somebody just wants a really flawless, amazing diamond at a great price, I think there's a customer for that too. So I don't actually think that they cannibalize one another as much as we think. But, you know, and again, it's, but I think every brand has to do what's right, and every retailer for their customer. And again, like, I'm just defaulting back to like, well, what does your customer want? I don't think diamonds are going away anytime soon. Engagement rings are still the #1 category in jewelry. That's not going to change for the US market. Obviously it's different if you're in India or somewhere else, but yeah, diamonds are here to stay. And I think there's actually room for both.
And just curious, did Barneys sell any lab-grown diamonds or designers who work in lab-grown?
Yeah, we had actually done a partnership with Diamond Foundry. I think they were a little bit ahead of the curve when that happened. And I think it caused a little bit of confusion for the sales associates, because they're like, how am I supposed to sell this when I have like a room full of other diamonds? And so I think the messaging was a little conflicting on how we executed it, but we did. We had a partnership with Diamond Foundry. We paired them up with Eva Farron, Knack Armstrong, and CVC Stone to do a collaboration, and it did okay. I think we probably could have done a better job on what pieces we created with them, but yeah, they actually did do a partnership with them.
Very cool. Thank you. I think we have time now I'm just going to do one more question, and I'm going to end with this one. Gurki, what is the single most important deciding factor when you're selecting a new jewelry line? You know, and what you looked at Barneys and what you also think for other retailers.
Yeah, I mean, the #1 thing was, is it bringing something different than what I already have? that was the number one question we were always trying to answer. And there's a lot of really talented designers out there, but you know, I obviously already had a portfolio of brands that I was loyal to, that were loyal to Barneys. And so if a collection came in and it was beautiful, but it kind of did the same thing or had the same aesthetic as a collection I already have, like that just wasn't going to work for me. So, and again, every retailer is different. Every retailer has a different mix of product, but that was the number one question that we always try to answer when we meet with them. So if you're a brand and you're going into a retailer, go to their store or go online, do your homework on how your collection is going to bring a new customer and be something new for that store.
Because as you mentioned before, you don't want one line cannibalizing the other.
Exactly. That's the one thing yeah. That's a death wish, totally.
Actually, I do have just one more question before we wrap it up. Did you go on a second date with the person you met on Dating Around? Because I watched that episode.
I did not. I was the only person that didn't choose a second date, which is why a lot of women and men gravitate towards my episodes saying like, oh my God, thank you, showing us like you don't have to just pick a guy just to pick a guy. I subsequently ended up dating the director of the show, and he and I are still friends. We're not dating anymore, and nothing was happening while we were filming. But as far as on the actual show, I did not pick a second date.
Okay, thank you. And the show, again, for anyone that's interested, it's really good. It's on Netflix. It's called Dating Around. There's 2 seasons, and Gurki was on the first season. Well, thanks again, Gurki, for joining us today. And thank you, Ashley, for hosting such a great session. It was really informative. And I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but everyone was so interested. We just had so many questions. You can tune in for another episode of My Next Question next Tuesday, September 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our associate editor, Lenore Fideau, is going to be interviewing Jennifer Shaheen, president of the Technology Therapy Group, about compiling and using customer data. You can read more about it and register at nationaljeweler.com.webinars. They're all listed on our site, and I'm going to drop that link into the chat right now if anybody needs it. Like I said, all our webinars are listed there, and you can go on there to read about any of them or register for any of them. As Gurki mentioned, they're all free. And I just want to give one more thank you to our sponsor today, RDI Diamonds. Thanks again to all our listeners for joining us today, and please take care.